defense would call John Donnelly, Your Honor. Thank you for the consideration.
Mm-hmm. I swear and affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Just fine.
State your name, please,
John Donnelly.
and your occupation.
I'm a retired physician's assistant. Now I do litigation support for attorneys and law firms and medical malpractice.
Okay. Tell me what a physician's assistant does.
Physician assistant basically augments a physician's services in MD. I was trained in trauma surgery and internal medicine.
How long had you been a PA? That's the normal term, or is that PA?
Yes,
physician's assistant?
since 1973.
Okay. Can we use that term as we go forward, a PA, and we know
Yes, sir.
what we're talking about? Great. Since 1973? And when you say that you trained in trauma, what do you mean by that?
Major trauma, auto accidents, gunshots, stabbings. It's at Emory University in Atlanta, and I trained mainly at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta.
And you know George Zimmerman?
Yes, sir.
And how do you know him?
George Zimmerman is a friend of mine. I've known him since about 2002, 2003. He's just a very good friend of mine.
We have just heard from your wife, obviously, probably passed in the hallway. So I'm going to abbreviate some of your testimony in that regard, but the jury, just a bit about your friendship with both George Zimmerman and his wife, Shellie Zimmerman.
We met George. My wife is a real estate broker, and she owns her own business, and we had an office in a building, kind of a one-story ranch-type building, Lake Mary Boulevard, and the insurance company was in one side, and her real estate office was in the other side. I have my own business, and my wife had an extra room in there, so my office was right next to hers, and we get along pretty well, so that worked out very well for us, and we have worked right next to each other for 15 years now.
Okay. Would you? Sure. Would you just give us a feel for how the friendship between yourself and Mr. Zimmerman and or his wife has grown over the past several years?
Our friendship really started with George oftentimes coming to our offices. We always had refrigerators full of sodas and food and microwaves. George took care of a lot of our insurance policies. All of our policies are with the insurance company. George helped us out a lot with that. We just got to be good friends with George. He was just a very smart, sharp young guy, and he'd just stop in, especially a lot of times after work, where we'd be there till 7 o'clock or so, and George would come in and sit and talk with us, especially about business stuff. He was very interested in business and starting his own business and how we were doing. And we just got to be very close to him. One time he came in and asked me to show him how to tie a Windsor knot in a tie. And that just touched a very little personal part of my heart, and he's always been there ever since.
So we credit you for the tie he's wearing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Matter of fact, we can probably credit you for more than just the tie, I understand. Is that correct? Did you help him with some clothing to get ready for his trial?
Yes, sir. I took George down, and I believe I bought him
And
3
I'm
suits.
sorry, let me interrupt you because I didn't tell you as well. We're very used to talking in familiar terms with our friends, George, Mark, whatever. In courtroom, we need to use full surnames so that not only the record is clear, but the formality of the courtroom. So I apologize for not mentioning that to you earlier, but
Yes, sir.
when you mention George, please tell us his full name, okay?
Yes, I took Mr. Zimmerman down to a clothing store, and I purchased him suits, ties, shirts for a courtroom. I've been in and out of courtrooms many times, not testifying, which can be a terrifying experience. But I've been taught by my attorney clients that when you come to a courtroom, you dress out of respect for the
And that
process.
was one of the, sorry, that was one of the ways you supported him, helping him out with some clothing.
Yes, sir.
You've also donated money to his legal defense fund, have you?
Yes, sir.
And you consider him a friend.
Very close friend.
Have you tell the jury sort of the spectrum of voice that you've heard about George, from conversational tones to yelling or whatever you have as your sort of experience level for his voice?
Yes, I have a very close experience level with his voice, both in casual conversation, laughing, lunches, dinners. We were in several political campaigns for which my feet still hurt. And George and I would be holding up signs and yelling and so forth during the campaigns.
Okay. You had not listened to what we now call the Lauer 911 call until recently, is that correct?
Yes.
Before you studied to become a PA, had you had any medical experience before that?
I was a combat medic in Vietnam.
Explain what that is.
You're rendering medical aid to your men that are hurt, injured.
So go through, if you would, and apologize to the extent we're bringing you back to that, but with that as a premise, if you would explain to the jury what a normal day is in the life of a combat medic in Vietnam.
Well, if everybody will give me a little patience here. When you're in the Army, you're with 60, 100 men. You eat, sleep, shower with them on a daily basis. Oftentimes you're sharing your bunks with them. I got in Vietnam in December of '67, and through December.
I apologize, sir. I'm going to object as to relevance.
Please approach.
Mr. Donnelly, we were talking about your experience as a medic in Vietnam. I think you were saying that you'd gotten there in 1967?
I got there in December 1967 through
And how long were you there?
to December of 1968.
So approximately a full year.
Yes, sir.
And were you there as a medic the entire time?
Yes, sir.
So you were telling us that you basically are, how many medics are there available for these 60 to 100 men in the group that you were telling us about?
There could be 2 to 4 based on what the mission was for that day. Generally, you try to have at least 2 available for a full company of men, which could vary from 40 to 60 depending upon availability.
Okay. And then the medics are responsible, obviously, for the medical care for the combat troops?
Yes, sir, for the men who get wounded and hit.
Now, when we talk, is company the right term? There's troops and companies and battalions.
Well, there's squad, company, platoons. Basically, you might be in a squad search and destroy. You might be a full platoon search and destroy. You might be in a full company.
Okay. The 60 to the 100 combat soldiers that you were working with, can we come up with a term so that we know what we're talking about? Can we call that the company?
Yes,
Or,
sir.
okay. So even though it might not be precisely accurate according to the U.S. Army, for our purposes, we'll call that group of combat, and it was men back then in the 60s, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's call them combat men of that company. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you, maybe 1 to 3 other medics were responsible for the medical care of that company?
Yes, sir.
These were these people that you would be with throughout the day and throughout the week and the month and the year?
You're with them through the day, through the night. You're with them at all times.
Have an opportunity to talk to them and interact with them?
Yes, sir. When you were back at base camp, that's all you did was really take care of your equipment and talk and, the scuttlebutt that goes on in the military, mess halls and so forth. You talk all day long because there's really nothing else to do.
Until the combat begins?
Until you get sent out on a mission, yes, sir.
Okay. During those times and with all of those men in the company, did you have an opportunity to talk to them both conversationally and what other form of communication? Yelling, screaming, laughing, anything like that?
Well, obviously the casual conversations, laughing, joking, sometimes drunken after 90-degree beers. But once you got into combat, then of course the voices change.
So you had a chance, and I know the timing isn't going to be right, but you would interact with the soldiers during the day, correct?
Yes, sir.
Presuming that the missions were at night, and I know that wasn't always true, but for our purposes, hanging out with them during the day, missions might occur at night, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you then have an opportunity where you would have to, when do you do your work? What happens that causes you to now have to be a medic and do something?
Well, at base camp, you took care of the normal routine medical issues that come up from colds or people, lacerations or anything else that happens. Once you're in the field, and once you get into combat, and in 1968, I think everybody remembers it was the Tet Offensive. It started the end of that January, and you could be fighting in the field for 5-10 days straight.
Did you then have an opportunity as a medic to have to attend to people that you knew during the day as they were wounded in combat?
Yes.
And tell the jury about that?
Yeah, it's a little difficult.
Well, if I may, I was just going to sort of see if I could lead
understand that
him.
there's been a request to approach the bench. I don't know what it's about.
Yes,
so if you'll
ma'am.
Please approach.
Again, Mr. Donnelly, we were at the point where I think we were talking to you about your opportunity to interact with the soldiers on a daily basis, and then sometimes having to go out to deal with them after being wounded in combat. With that as a premise, tell me about, you would be called out to do what?
In the midst of combat, there are a lot of people yelling, screaming. Sometimes they're yelling, barking out orders. Other times they're yelling for ammo. Sometimes they're yelling for a medic. And sometimes they're screaming for help.
Okay. And based upon the year that you spent doing that, were you able to distinguish the yelling for help or the asking for a medic and compare that to those people that you had heard the day or the day of or the day before in regular conversational tone?
When you're in a combat situation like that, in the din of battle, for some reason you develop, I'm not sure what you would call it, an ability, but when you hear that, you can distinguish the screams for help, distinguish the screams for a medic. You grab your rifle, you grab your medic's kit. Your job is to run. You go to where they're at, but invariably, because you know the men you're with, you know the men that you eat, sleep with, you know who it's going to be before you get there.
And you can tell that from hearing their voice screaming for help and comparing that to what you heard in your everyday life with them?
Yes.
Okay. I had started this a moment ago by talking to you about the evidence in this case and whether or not you had listened to the phone call, the 911 call in this case. Had you listened to it, or when was the first time that you listened to it?
I had heard pieces of it inadvertently, listening to the news or whatever, and I generally tuned it out and walked away. I really didn't want to.
Why? Tell the jury why you didn't want to listen to this tape.
It can be very distressing.
To listen to a friend of yours scream for help, if in fact it was a friend of yours?
Yes.
And is that why you didn't listen to the tape?
That's why.
But you have listened to it recently, is that correct?
I listened to it on this past Saturday morning, sitting in my office alone, and I found it on the internet somewhere, and I played it exactly twice.
I'm going to play it for you again, if I might. This is the tape that is in evidence. I'm not sure if you listen to on the internet, but I'm going to ask if you would listen to this. I'm going to play it one time through to the end of the tape. And then if you want me to play it again, let me know. If you want me to go back to a certain point, let me know. At the end of which I'm going to ask if you have an opinion concerning who you hear on the tape, okay?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, I'm talking about not the person who's speaking to the 911 operator, but the noise in the background, okay?
Maybe both. I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay, what's the address that they're near?
1211 Twin Trees Lane.
Twin Trees Lane. Is this in the Twin Lake homes in Sanford?
Yeah.
Okay. And is it a male or female?
It sounds like a male.
And you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
Okay. Does he look hurt to you?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending him.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right. What is your phone number?
Is that the tape or very similar to the tape that you've listened to last week?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to whose voice that is screaming in the background?
Yes, sir.
Based upon your knowledge of your conversations with George Zimmerman and the life experience that you've now brought to the jury, whose voice do you believe that to be screaming for help?
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that is George Zimmerman. And I wish to God I did not have that ability to understand that.
Nothing further on.
I think it's still morning. Good morning, Mr. Donnelly.
Hello, sir.
Mr. Donnelly, you recall I took a deposition of you back, I believe it was May 9th maybe of this year, correct?
Yes,
That
sir.
sound about right?
Yes, sir.
I think your wife was first, or maybe you were first and then your wife, you recall
Oh,
that?
my wife was first.
As it should be, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then we took yours and it was very brief, correct?
Yes, sir.
You never mentioned anything about testifying, about identifying the voice, or did you?
I don't believe I did, sir. I
Okay.
don't believe it was asked. As I recall, everybody was hungry.
Okay. So you think it was just short, or you didn't mention anything about that? Didn't I ask you what you were going to be testifying about?
I don't remember being asked if I was going to testify about it. At the time, well, through this whole thing, I really didn't want anything to do with the tape.
Right, okay, so what you're saying is after the deposition on May 9th, 2013, you said it was last Saturday that you, on purpose, listened to the tape, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Your Honor, I have address that after we finish. So you, after the deposition and between, literally last Saturday, so we talking about like on the, I guess today's the 8th, so we're talking about the 6th is when you listened to the recording?
Yes, sir. It was Saturday morning.
And I apologize, we're talking about last Saturday, literally.
This last Saturday,
All right.
just
And-
a couple of days ago.
Right, because my recollection is in the deposition, you had not listened to the recording or really were going to testify about it, correct?
I may have heard parts of it, but I generally try to, I always tuned it out. I walked away from it.
On
It
purpose,
was-
I think you said,
On
correct?
purpose. It was very distressing to me.
Sure, and so what you did is, 2 days ago, you on purpose listened to it to see whether you could identify the voice so you'd be able to testify in court, correct?
I listened to it very purposely in a very quiet setting because I think I just needed to before
Sure.
I came here today.
All right. And I think you said you listened to it twice.
Yes,
Did I
sir.
understand you correctly? Now, if I may, why did you have to listen to it twice if you, at the first time, knew it was George Zimmerman's voice?
I don't know, I just played it a second time.
Just to verify it in your mind that you would be sure that you could come to court and say, absolutely?
No, it was just an emotional
Okay.
experience for me, and I
Okay,
don't even know why I played it twice, but I did.
okay. And I gather you made sure you were in a room setting where nobody else was present, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And I believe your wife already testified, and obviously you weren't in the courtroom when she testified. My question is, prior to listening to that tape on Saturday, had you discussed it with your wife at all, in terms of whether she had listened to the tape at all? And I'm not saying that was improper, I'm just saying, do you recall?
not really. We've never really tried to discuss much of anything
Okay,
with this.
all right. She mentioned, or I know when we took your deposition, you had mentioned that you had given money before to the defense fund.
Yes, sir, I have.
And I think it was $2,500 at that time, correct?
I gave a check for $2,500 for his defense, and then I gave $500 to his personal website.
Right, so that was $3,000, and then after that, you bought him suits?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you recall how much approximately money? How much
About
money?
$1,700.
Okay, and then that includes ties and shirts and all that other stuff that you were asking?
Yes, sir, they were on sale.
Okay, was that a Joseph Banks? Do you want to plug wherever you bought it? No. Did you get a good deal on those, I gather is what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you testified because you've come to court before, people need to appear a certain way in court properly, et cetera, correct?
Yes, sir. It shows respect for the system.
Yes, yes, sir. And so you would agree that there's a bias there on your behalf of George Zimmerman, correct, because of your friendship?
He is my very dear friend.
Yes,
I
sir.
think
Yes,
of him
sir.
as a son.
All right, and in other words, you contributed money to help his cause, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you also, as you mentioned, the clothing, et cetera.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is that it in terms of total? So that was, you said $3,000 and then about $1,700, so that's about $4,700, give or take a little?
Yes, sir. Other than taking food
Right.
to his home.
Yes,
for
sir.
him.
Other than that, I'm talking about monetarily or?
Monetarily, that is it, sir.
Okay, all right. And then, did you listen to any other recordings? Specifically, the recording where George Zimmerman is speaking to the 911 non-emergency operator?
I believe I heard part of that on the news.
Okay. Was that about the same time, or was that recently, or back in February or March or April of last year?
That was a ways back because we've tried not to watch anything.
On purpose? Is that correct?
Yes.
I know you're nodding your head, and so I knew the answer was yes, but
Yes, sir, and
we
I
just
know-
need for the record, I know these jurors can see.
I know better, too.
Okay, all right. And so you have heard parts of the non-emergency, only snippets that you think, or?
Probably snippets. I really
Okay.
try not to pay too
Sure.
much.
Okay. And those snippets, do you recall what was said in the parts you heard on the news?
Not really, sir.
Okay. Let me do, if I want to do this, I'm going to play a recording for you if I could.
Yes, sir.
And for the record, that state's exhibit. What number is it? 173.
Central Police Department, lines being recorded, Sean.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. It's Retrieview Circle. The best address I can give you is 111 This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black?
Do you recognize the voice?
Yes, sir.
Or one of the two voices, right?
Yes, sir.
And one of them is George Zimmerman, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
First Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
hoodie, like a gray hoodie, and he wore jeans or sweatpants and white tennis shoes. He's here now. He was just staring.
Oh, he's just walking around the
looking
area.
at all the houses.
Okay.
Now, so far, is that just a normal conversation you would have heard on a regular basis with Mr. Zimmerman? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now he's just staring at me.
Okay, and so did 1111 retrieve you or 111?
That's the clubhouse.
That's the clubhouse. Do you know what he's near the clubhouse right now?
Yeah, now he's coming towards me.
Okay.
He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he
He's got
was?
a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Late teens, okay.
Mm-hmm. Something's wrong with him. Yep. He's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if we got anything, okay?
Over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. These assholes, they always get away.
Did you hear that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Said something, oh God, these assholes, they always get away. Did you hear that language? You want me to play it back or?
Your Honor, I would judge it as a mischaracterization of the evidence. He added words that didn't exist on the tape.
Sustained, if you want to.
Do you want me to play it back for you? Oh, can I?
These assholes, they always get away.
Did you hear that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you agree that based on your experience and his voice, he's a little more excited than previously?
No, sir.
You think he's just the same monotone?
Everybody has different tones to their
Okay.
voice as they're speaking, much
Right.
like I am now, but
Right.
he's speaking to law enforcement and he's trying to give them information.
Okay. And so you had not heard that before?
I hadn't heard that part before, no.
Okay. And I don't need to play the whole thing. You heard another part dealing with where he uses the words, some other derogatory words. You had not heard that before?
I may have heard snippets of it, sir, but I'm hearing everything pretty much fully today.
Okay. So you were trying to become familiar with his voice, I guess. You were already familiar with his voice, but you were trying to compare it to just the 911 recording on Saturday?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You didn't go back and listen to any other recordings?
No.
Okay. That's what I was trying to get. You didn't compare it to any other voices that he had made prior calls or anything like that?
No, sir, I didn't need to.
Okay. Because you already knew his voice?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, on that recording that you listened to, the 911 operator, I'm sorry, they're calling it the Lauer, the one that Mr. O'Mara played for you. I'm not going to play it again. You know which one I'm talking about? The one
Yes,
you
sir.
listened Saturday. I apologize.
Yes, sir.
Okay. It was similar to the one that was played in court, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you heard the person you believe is George Zimmerman yelling, help, 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 continuously, correct?
That was absolutely George Zimmerman.
Right? And he was yelling, no doubt in your mind, you believe it's George Zimmerman.
There's not a single doubt in my mind, sir.
Okay, all right. And he was yelling over and over, help, 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 correct?
Yes, and I heard there's like other screams, help, but the screams in particular, I could tell, I knew that was George Zimmerman.
So you heard other screams too?
There was help, there was some other ones. Those particular emotional, obviously when someone is in dire straits, whether it be in combat or anything else, your voice obviously changes. I've heard a 250-pound man, sound like a little girl screaming, but before you get there, you know who he is.
Right. So you believe there was some that were definitely George Zimmerman, and others you heard you couldn't make out who it was. Did I understand you correctly?
The voices I heard screaming and for help were George Zimmerman. There were other voices up on top of that. In the tape, there's 911 operator, there's other stuff, which oddly enough, I'm familiar with, because in the din of battle you have a lot of extraneous other noises going on at the same time.
Other people yelling or other people, whatever, speaking? Other people yelling.
At the same time, you've got small arms fire, you may have mortars, rockets, you've got people screaming, but you still have the ability to pick out the ones that you have to run to as a medic.
The ones that you're familiar with, in other words. The other people, if you weren't familiar, if some guy had shown up that day in the company and you had never heard his voice, you wouldn't be able to pick out his voice as easily as the person you're familiar with, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Yeah.
The voices that, of course, we've been together, most of us, for a period of months, and we all knew each other's voice and who it was.
My question is, if there had been a person that had just shown up that day and God forbid there was a firefight out there and there was a shooting or whatever, you would not have been able, if you had never heard his voice, you wouldn't be able to pick out that person's voice.
No, sir. After that February, we had a lot of new guys.
Right. Okay. And in this case, the only voice you're able to pick out is George Zimmerman's voice, correct?
The voice screaming on the tape is absolutely George Zimmerman, sir.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. I just have a matter to bring up to the court, and we can do it. I don't know if there's...
Shall we finish the examination?
I didn't know if it had to do with before that or not, so.
I think we can do it right after. But...
Okay, any redirect?
Please, Your Honor. Just to clear, as you listen to the 911 tape, I thought you were saying that some of the screams were...
Objection as to leading?
Sustained.
When you listened to the 911 tape, were all of these screams that you heard, those that said help and those that were just screaming, was that all from George Zimmerman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then there were other voices like the 911 operator, Ms. Lauer, and others. But the background noise, who... Was it one person or was it more than one person in the background?
That was one person. It was easy for me, just based on my past experiences, very easy for me. That was George Zimmerman.
Okay. And did you ever discuss with your wife this non-emergency?
No, sir.
Okay. You had listened to this tape on Saturday, 2 days ago?
Yes, sir.
When did you contact me?
I believe I called you Saturday afternoon.
Right after you had done this?
Yes, sir.
Was that the first time they had talked about your testifying regarding the 911 call at all?
Yes, sir.
Was that a difficult decision for you to make?
Extremely.
Was it an emotional conversation that you and I had regarding having to deal with this issue?
Yes, sir.
Are you coloring or changing your testimony at all simply to help Mr. Zimmerman in what you might perceive to be a time of need?
Not at all, sir. This courtroom is about truth. At some point in time, even though this is personally very hard for me, this is the place truth is supposed to come out.
Is that why you decided to deal with whatever demons existed from 45 years ago and still testify concerning this event and those events here today?
Yes.
Nothing further on.
Whose idea was it to listen to the recording Saturday?
It was my own, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
May Mr. Donnelly be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, sir. You are excused. Counsel, approach the bench.